19 Black R&B singers, most iconic jerks of all times. They sang the songs that made us fall in love, that lifted generations and defined the very soul of R&B. But behind the spotlight, many of these so-called legends lived double lives filled with scandals, betrayals, violence, and secrets darker than any lyric they ever recorded. From marriages that shocked the community to crimes that destroyed careers, these are the stories the industry tried to bury. Stay with us as we uncover the 19 Black R&B singers, remembered not just for their music, but for becoming the most iconic jerks of all time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. David Ruffin. David Ruffin's story is one of brilliance and tragedy intertwined. Born in 1941 in rural Mississippi, Ruffin grew up in poverty, one of 8 children in a strict household where survival was often more important than childhood. Music became his refuge. By the early 1960s, his raspy yet smooth tenor made him stand out, and his life changed forever when he joined The Temptations in 1964. With Ruffin as lead singer, the group skyrocketed to fame, producing hits like My Girl Ain't Too Proud to Beg and I Wish It Would Rain. His unique voice gave soul music a new identity, and audiences adored him. But fame fueled an ego that quickly spiraled out of control. Ruffin began demanding that the group be renamed David Ruffin and The Temptations, insisting he was the star attraction. He often skipped rehearsals, arrived late to concerts, and clashed bitterly with his bandmates. His behavior culminated in 1968 when he was abruptly fired from the group, despite his powerful contribution. Behind the scenes, Ruffin's personal life was just as stormy. His relationship with fellow Motown singer Tammy Terrell became notorious. Friends and colleagues reported seeing unexplained bruises on her, and one night in a fit of jealousy, Ruffin hurled a glass of liquor at her face. The incident highlighted the darker side of a man whose public persona was built on charm and passion. After his dismissal, Ruffin attempted a solo career, releasing tracks such as My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me. Though initially successful, his inability to manage fame, coupled with his escalating drug addiction, ruined opportunities. His once promising career slipped into chaos. By the 1970s and 1980s, he was plagued by arrests, financial troubles, and unreliable performances. In one infamous episode, Ruffin disappeared for days after a scheduled show, leaving fans furious and promoters hesitant to ever book him again. Despite his struggles, there were brief flashes of redemption. In 1982, he reunited with The Temptations for the reunion tour, drawing nostalgic cheers from audiences who still loved his voice. Yet even then, old patterns returned, missed rehearsals disputes, and a relapse into cocaine use. Friends described him as a man torn between his extraordinary gift and his destructive impulses. On June 1, 1991, David Ruffin was found dead in Philadelphia after an overdose, just 50 years old. The tragedy of his life was summed up in that moment, a voice that had once lifted millions, silenced too soon, not by fate, but by choices he couldn't escape. To fans of Motown, Ruffin remains a paradox, an unforgettable singer whose legacy is equal parts beauty and warning. David Ruffin's story reminds us that talent can be both a blessing and a curse. He will forever be remembered as the man who sang My Girl, but also as the troubled figure who lost control of the very life his voice had built. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's story is a haunting reminder that genius often walks hand in hand with torment. Born in 1939 in Washington, D.C., Marvin was raised under the strict and often violent hand of his father, a Pentecostal preacher. From a young age, he turned to music as both sanctuary and escape, honing a voice that would later be described as silk dipped in fire. By the 1960s, he became Motown's shining jewel, delivering tender ballads like Ain't That Peculiar and How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You. His duets with Tammy Terrell melted hearts, and his later works, especially the groundbreaking 1971 album What's Going On, transformed R&B into a vehicle for social justice. Yet beneath the acclaim, Marvin carried deep scars. Fame did not heal his inner wounds, it magnified them. By the mid-1970s, Marvin's life was unraveling. Struggling with depression, stage fright, and substance abuse, he often isolated himself in recording studios, lost in cycles of paranoia and self-doubt. His marriage to Janice Hunter became volatile, riddled with accusations of betrayal, control, and episodes of domestic violence. Friends recall nights when Marvin would lock Janice in a room, blasting his own song Trouble Man through the speakers as if mocking the chaos of their lives. As his personal struggles deepened, Marvin's professional output became erratic. He would spend months obsessing over unfinished tracks, often fueled by cocaine. His paranoia grew so intense that he believed friends, lovers, even fellow musicians were conspiring against him. Despite these inner battles, he remained capable of brilliance, releasing hits like Sexual Healing in 1982, which won him 2 Grammy Awards and revitalized his career. For a brief moment, it seemed redemption was possible. But the shadows never left him. By 1983, Marvin had retreated to his parents' home in Los Angeles, estranged from many in the industry. Arguments with his father grew more intense, often erupting into physical confrontations. On April 1, 1984, the tension reached its breaking point. After a heated dispute, Marvin's father shot him twice with a revolver, ironically a gun Marvin himself had given as a gift. The soul legend died just 1 day before his 45th birthday. Marvin Gaye's death stunned the world, but perhaps what lingers even more than the tragedy is the contradiction of his life. He was a man who gave us timeless songs about peace, compassion, and love, yet privately wrestled with demons he could never silence. His voice asked the world what's going on, but his own heart never found the answer. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack's life was a mixture of musical brilliance and scandal that shocked the soul community. Born in Cleveland in 1944, he grew up in a gospel-singing family, quickly proving himself as both a gifted guitarist and vocalist. His big break came under the mentorship of Sam Cooke, who signed him and his brothers to SAR Records. By the early 1960s, Bobby was writing and recording songs that would shape the direction of soul music. When the Rolling Stones turned his track It's All Over Now into a global hit, Bobby's reputation as a songwriter soared. His own voice, raw and full of grit, carried a streetwise honesty that stood out in an era of polished Motown harmonies. But his personal choices would leave an indelible scar. In 1965, just 3 months after Sam Cooke's tragic death, Bobby stunned the world by marrying Cooke's widow, Barbara Campbell. He was only 21, she was 31. Fans and the media called it betrayal. Radio stations blacklisted him. The Cooke family was outraged. Instead of being celebrated as Cooke's protege, Bobby was branded as the man who disrespected his mentor's memory. The controversy deepened years later when Barbara caught Bobby in a relationship with her teenage daughter, Linda. Furious, she fired a gun at him, the bullet grazing his cheek. He survived physically, but his reputation never fully recovered. Despite the scandals, Bobby's artistry endured. He wrote for Aretha Franklin, and Wilson Pickett played guitar for Ray Charles, and created classics like Across 110th Street, a song immortalized in film. Yet his career was always shadowed by drug abuse, erratic behavior, and the lingering perception of mistrust. By the 1980s, Womack's lifestyle had taken a toll, but flashes of his brilliance remained. In 2012, he staged an unlikely comeback with The Bravest Man in the Universe, produced by Damon Albarn and Richard Russell. The album was praised as a raw confession of survival. Only 2 years later, Bobby Womack passed away at 70, leaving behind a complicated legacy, one of soul-stirring music and deeply flawed choices. He will always be remembered as a genius whose voice touched millions, but also as a cautionary tale of how one decision can forever alter the way history remembers you. Al Green. Few singers embodied the sound of romance like Al Green. Born in Arkansas in 1946, He blended gospel roots with silky R&B melodies, creating timeless hits such as Let's Stay Together, Love and Happiness, and Tired of Being Alone. By the early 1970s, he was America's love poet, the man whose voice could transform heartache into beauty. His falsetto soared with tenderness, and his stage presence suggested a man devoted entirely to love and joy. But one night in 1974 destroyed that image forever. At his Memphis home, Al's girlfriend Mary Woodson confronted him after discovering he had secretly married another woman. In a fit of anguish, she carried a pot of boiling grits into the bathroom where he was resting and poured it over him. The burns seared his back and arms, leaving permanent scars. Moments later, Mary turned his own gun on herself, leaving behind a note filled with grief and betrayal. The incident horrified fans. How could the man who sang so tenderly about commitment be caught in such a devastating tragedy? For many, the scars on his skin became symbolic of the contradictions in his life, a man adored for celebrating love, yet entangled in deception and heartbreak. After the scandal, Green sought redemption. He turned away from secular stardom and became an ordained pastor, founding the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church in Memphis. He shifted toward gospel music, releasing albums that earned him a new following and even Grammy Awards in the gospel category. Though he later returned to secular collaborations with artists like Annie Lennox and John Legend, the shadow of 1974 always followed him. Al Green's story is a paradox. He remains one of the most celebrated voices of the 1970s, his songs still fixtures of weddings and radio stations. Yet beneath the velvet tones is a legacy scarred literally and figuratively by betrayal, tragedy, and the haunting reminder that even the sweetest melodies can conceal painful truths. Sly Stone. Sly Stone was once the brightest spark in the galaxy of R&B and funk. Born Sylvester Stewart in Texas in 1943 and raised in California, he was a child prodigy who mastered multiple instruments and carried an electric charisma. In 1966, he formed Sly and the Family Stone, a revolutionary band that blended black and white male and female musicians at a time when America was still divided by race and culture. Their hits, Dance to the Music Everyday People and Stand, were not just songs, they were anthems of unity, optimism, and rebellion. The band's rainbow lineup on stage symbolized a new world many dared to dream of. But behind the kaleidoscopic clothes and infectious grooves, Sly was slipping deeper into chaos. Fame fed his appetite for drugs, paranoia, and power. By the early 1970s, he carried guns beneath his shimmering coats, convinced enemies lurked everywhere. Concerts became unpredictable. He showed up late, or sometimes not at all. In 1978 at the Oakland Coliseum, thousands of fans waited hours only to watch him stumble onto stage, collapse mid-performance, mutter curses, and walk away. Each no-show chipped away at his legend. Band members left one by one. Legal battles drained his wealth. Addiction consumed his creativity. By the 1980s, Sly had faded from mainstream view, remembered more for broken promises than for unity. In a 2010 report, the world was stunned to learn that the once famed star was living inside a small, dilapidated van in Los Angeles, parked behind a house on Crenshaw Boulevard. Inside were old cassettes, crumpled notebooks, and a portable radio. "I'm still writing music," he told a reporter, but his voice carried more sadness than conviction. Sly Stone's legacy remains conflicted. He was the man who changed the face of American music, proving funk could carry messages of love and equality. Yet he also became a warning about unchecked fame excess and the fragility of genius. The music world owes him a debt, but the man himself became a tragic echo of what could have been. Prince. Prince Rogers Nelson was born in Minneapolis in 1958, and from his earliest years he was determined to do music his way. By his 20s, he was not only a performer but also a composer, arranger, producer, and instrumentalist who played nearly every instrument on his albums. His fusion of funk rock and R&B revolutionized the industry. Purple Rain 1999 and Sign of the Times cemented him as a global icon, and his flamboyant style turned him into the definition of cool. Yet those closest to him often described Prince not as a collaborator, but as a ruler. He demanded absolute control over his band, his studio, even the smallest details of sound. One mistake, one note he disliked, and a musician could be fired on the spot. He rarely greeted people outside his circle and often insisted on being addressed as Sir. Former assistants described overnight sessions where he would force engineers to perfect a single drum sound until it carried the purple essence he demanded. In 1993, his war with Warner Brothers reached a breaking point. Furious over contract restrictions, he sued the label, abandoned his name, and became known only as a symbol. To many, it looked eccentric. To him, it was rebellion against a system that betrayed him. He appeared in public with the word slave written across his face, a shocking reminder of how he viewed the music industry. When Prince died in 2016 from an accidental overdose of fentanyl, the world mourned. Tributes poured in for his genius, his innovation, his unmatched influence. Yet among those who had worked under him, memories were more complicated. Admiration mixed with exhaustion, respect tangled with fear. Prince remains both the greatest innovator of his era and a reminder that genius can demand a price few around it can bear. Ike Turner. Ike Turner's name is etched into music history for both triumph and torment. Born in 1931 in Mississippi, he grew up surrounded by blues and rhythm that seeped into his soul. By his late teens, Ike had formed the Kings of Rhythm, and in 1951, he recorded Rocket 88, widely regarded as one of the first rock and roll records. He was a pioneer fusing blues, R&B, and emerging rock into a new sound that changed popular music forever. But Ike Turner was not just remembered for innovation. He became infamous for his cruelty behind closed doors. His partnership with Tina Turner was one of the most electrifying acts of the 1960s and 70s, producing unforgettable hits like Proud Mary and River Deep, Mountain High. On stage, they were unstoppable. Off stage, Ike's iron grip controlled everything from the music to Tina's personal life. Stories of his abuse became legend. Musicians described him as volatile, violent, and paranoid. In one infamous incident in 1976, after a performance at the Statler Hilton in Dallas, Ike struck Tina in their car so severely that her nose bled. In that moment, she fled barefoot across a busy highway, escaping years of torment with nothing but her life. Her story of survival, later told in her autobiography, I, Tina, and the 1993 film What's Love Got to Do With It, exposed Ike's darkness to the world. As Tina built her independence and global stardom, Ike's decline accelerated. He drowned himself in cocaine and erratic behavior, leading to multiple arrests. In 1989, he was sentenced to prison on drug charges. Even after his release, he remained unapologetic, often denying the abuse that so many had testified about. By the time he died in 2007 from a cocaine overdose, his reputation was irreparably split, a pioneer who helped shape rock and soul, yet a symbol of unchecked cruelty. Ike Turner's story forces music lovers to confront the darkest question: how do we honor artistic influence when the man behind it left scars no melody can erase? James Brown. James Brown was not just a singer, he was a revolution. Born in 1933 in South Carolina, abandoned by his parents, he grew up in extreme poverty. From the cotton fields to juvenile detention, he clawed his way out through pure talent and fire. By the 1960s, with hits like I Got You, I Feel Good, and Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, he reshaped R&B into funk, commanding every rhythm, every beat, every stage. His charisma and energy made him the godfather of soul. Yet behind the electrifying dance moves and sharp suits, Brown was a man ruled by control and paranoia. Musicians who worked with him recalled fear in the studio. A wrong note could mean fines. A wrong look could mean being fired mid-show. He demanded loyalty, but what he gave back was intimidation. Drugs intensified his rage. By the 1970s and 1980s, his personal life became a storm of violence, especially against his wives. In 1988, an incident turned surreal. Armed with a shotgun, Brown stormed into an insurance office in Augusta, Georgia, furious that someone had used a restroom he claimed was his. Employees fled as he shouted wildly. When police arrived, Brown fled in his pickup truck, leading officers on a multi-state chase into South Carolina. Shots were fired at his tires before he was caught. Sentenced to 6 years in prison for assault, drug use, and reckless endangerment, Brown served less than 3. But the image of the once proud icon in handcuffs became an unforgettable stain. Though he later returned to performing and was celebrated as a legend until his death in 2006, his life story remains a paradox. An innovator who inspired millions, yet a man who terrified those closest to him. James Brown's legacy, like his music, is raw, intense, and impossible to ignore. He taught the world to feel good, but his own life often spiraled into chaos and despair. Ronald Isley. For decades, Ronald Isley embodied elegance in R&B. Born in 1941 in Cincinnati, Ohio, he grew up with music as a family tradition. Alongside his brothers, he formed the Isley Brothers, a group that spanned generations with hits like Shout Twist and Shout This Old Heart of Mine and Between the Sheets. Ronald's smooth voice and debonair stage presence turned him into the refined gentleman of soul. He dressed in tailored suits, carried himself with sophistication, and became a model of R&B grace. Yet appearances can hide deeper truths. While Ronald Isley was celebrated on stage, his private life revealed a man entangled in financial deceit. Behind the shiny cars, lavish mansions, and designer clothes was a pattern of unpaid taxes and questionable accounting. For years, whispers followed him. How could a man with so many hits constantly be in debt? The answers arrived in the early 2000s when federal investigators uncovered years of tax evasion. In 2006, the once proud Mr. Biggs walked out of a Los Angeles courtroom sentenced to 3 years in prison. He had been convicted of hiding assets, failing to pay millions in back taxes, and even using dead relatives' names to conceal bank accounts. The revelations stunned fans who had admired his aura of wealth and style. What seemed like sophistication was in part a carefully maintained illusion. Even after prison, Ronald Isley's career did not completely collapse. His voice remained golden, and collaborations with younger artists like R. Kelly on Down Low, Nobody Has to Know, kept him relevant to new generations. But the stain of fraud lingered, overshadowing the image of refinement he had cultivated for decades. Ronald Isley's legacy is a paradox. He remains a central figure in the evolution of soul and R&B, an artist whose family band defined eras. Yet his fall from grace reminds us that image and reality often collide, and sometimes the mask of wealth conceals a trail of dishonor. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was more than an artist, he was a global phenomenon. Born in 1958 in Gary, Indiana, he began performing at age 5 as the youngest member of the Jackson 5. With his angelic voice and electrifying stage presence, he became Motown's prodigy. By the 1980s, Michael's solo career had exploded, with Thriller selling over 65 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album in history. His moonwalk, his glove, his high-pitched cries, everything about him became larger than life. But fame brought shadows. In 1993, the world was stunned when Michael faced allegations of child molestation involving a 13-year-old boy. The case dominated headlines, dividing fans. Michael settled out of court for $23 million, insisting the payment was meant to protect his peace, not an admission of guilt. Still, the damage was done. His image as the magical Peter Pan of pop was forever fractured. The accusations returned in 2005 with a highly publicized trial in Santa Maria, California. After 4 months, Michael was acquitted on all charges. Yet even vindication could not fully erase public suspicion. For millions, he remained an untouchable hero. For others, He was a fallen idol whose Neverland Ranch carried too many dark whispers. Michael's later years reflected both brilliance and fragility. His history tour in the mid-1990s broke records, but he increasingly withdrew from public life. By the 2000s, financial troubles, health issues, and endless scrutiny weighed heavily on him. In 2009, as he prepared for a grand comeback with the This Is It concerts, he died suddenly at age 50 from acute propofol intoxication administered by his personal doctor. The world mourned with a grief rarely seen in modern history. Memorials erupted globally. His music reclaimed the charts, and his influence became undeniable once again. Yet even in death, debates over his legacy raged on. Michael Jackson remains one of the most celebrated and controversial figures in music history. He was a genius who redefined entertainment, but also a man whose private life raised questions no verdict could ever fully silence. Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown's journey through R&B is a tale of raw talent consumed by chaos. Born in Boston in 1969, he rose to fame as a founding member of New Edition, a boy band that captured teenage hearts in the early 1980s with sweet harmonies and polished choreography. But Bobby's restless energy and rebellious spirit clashed with the group's wholesome image. By 1985, he had been pushed out, setting the stage for a solo career that would cement him as R&B's most notorious bad boy. His 1988 album, Don't Be Cruel, turned him into a superstar. With hits like My Prerogative and Every Little Step, Bobby redefined R&B with swagger, fusing streetwise confidence with smooth vocals. He became the symbol of independence and youthful rebellion, earning platinum records and sold-out tours. For a moment, Bobby Brown looked unstoppable. But behind the stage lights was a life spinning out of control. His marriage to Whitney Houston in 1992 was one of the most talked-about unions in music history. To the world, they were royalty. Two powerhouse voices joined together. In reality, their marriage unraveled into addiction, violence, and bitter arguments. Bobby faced repeated arrests for assault, drug possession, and public disturbances. In 2003, he was jailed after a violent altercation that left Whitney hospitalized. As his scandals multiplied, Bobby's artistry was overshadowed by tabloid headlines. He admitted in interviews to years of drug use and destructive behavior, yet often tried to paint himself as misunderstood. By the late 2000s, Whitney's tragic death and the loss of their daughter, Bobby Christina, deepened the stain on his name. Bobby Brown remains a controversial figure. His influence on the new Jack Swing era is undeniable, and his songs still echo across generations. But his story stands as a reminder of how arrogance, addiction, and unchecked impulses can turn the brightest crown into ashes. Rick James. Rick James embodied excess like few others in music history. Born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. in Buffalo, New York in 1948, his path to stardom was unconventional. He fled to Canada to escape the draft played in rock bands and absorbed influences from across genres. By the late 1970s, he returned to the U.S. with a mission to fuse funk, soul, and rock into a blazing new sound. His 1981 hit, Super Freak, became an anthem, cementing his place as the flamboyant punk-funk superstar. On stage, Rick was magnetic. Dressed in leather beads and braids, he commanded audiences with energy that was wild, sensual, and unapologetically outrageous. Songs like Give It To Me Baby and Mary Jane turned him into both a party icon and a cultural rebel. But the brighter Rick burned, the darker his shadows grew. Behind closed doors, drugs and violence spiraled out of control. Cocaine became his constant companion, feeding a manic lifestyle of endless parties and destructive outbursts. In the early 1990s, two chilling incidents brought his private demons into the open. Rick and his girlfriend, Tanya Hijazi, were accused of holding women captive, assaulting them, and using drugs to maintain control. The cases shocked fans who had once seen him as just an eccentric star. In 1993, Rick James was sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison. Even prison couldn't erase his influence. Hip-hop artists sampled his tracks endlessly. and younger generations rediscovered his music. But Rick himself never fully escaped his demons. After years of declining health, he died in 2004 at the age of 56, with multiple substances found in his system. Rick James left behind a legacy as fiery as his music. He was both a groundbreaking innovator and a symbol of how fame can devour those who live too close to the edge. George Clinton. George Clinton was a musical architect who built an entire universe out of funk. Born in North Carolina in 1941 and raised in New Jersey, Clinton started out as a barber while dreaming of something bigger. By the 1970s, he had created not just a band, but a movement, Parliament Funkadelic. With outrageous costumes, psychedelic grooves, and cosmic themes, Clinton and his P-Funk army turned funk into a religion. Songs like Flashlight, One Nation Under a Groove, and Atomic Dog didn't just entertain, they reshaped the possibilities of R&B, soul, and even hip-hop. Clinton's vision was revolutionary. He fused rock guitars with deep funk bass lines, wrapped it all in interstellar mythology, and took audiences on a trip beyond Earth. Fans adored his creativity, and musicians across genres from Prince to Dr. Dre owed him inspiration. He was more than a band leader. He was a cosmic father figure to funk itself. But behind the kaleidoscopic wigs and galactic imagery was a darker side. By the late 1980s, discontent was brewing among his bandmates. Musicians like Jerome Bigfoot Braley and Fuzzy Haskins accused Clinton of cheating them out of royalties. Lawsuits revealed signed contracts, missing checks, and allegations of fraud. Clinton denied the charges, insisting that chaos was just part of the funk ethos. Yet insiders told a different story. George Clinton controlled the money, the publishing, and the narrative, leaving many who had poured their lives into Parliament Funkadelic struggling financially. The legal battles stretched for decades from New York to Los Angeles, and many of the wounds never healed. Still, Clinton remained untouchable in the eyes of funk loyalists. He performed into the 2010s, received Lifetime Achievement Awards, and was hailed as a pioneer. His influence on hip-hop especially was undeniable, as rap icons sampled P-Funk tracks to build the foundations of modern beats. George Clinton's story remains divided. On one side, he is the visionary who expanded music beyond imagination. On the other, he is remembered as a manipulator who kept the keys to the vault. His legacy proves that even the brightest stars of funk cast shadows long after the lights go out. R. Kelly. Few artists reached the heights of Robert Sylvester Kelly, better known as R. Kelly. Born in Chicago in 1967, he emerged in the 1990s as the king of R&B with hits like Bump and Grind, Ignition Remix, and I Believe I Can Fly. His music became the soundtrack of weddings, graduations, and block parties, blending gospel-inspired vocals with sensual R&B grooves. His pen was equally powerful. He wrote and produced for Celine Dion, Michael Jackson, and countless others. For a time, Kelly appeared untouchable, but beneath the polished suits and chart-topping anthems, whispers followed him for decades. In the late 1990s, rumors circulated about his involvement with underage girls. In 2002, a video surfaced allegedly showing him with a minor, igniting a firestorm of controversy. The case dragged on for years, and in 2008, Kelly was acquitted, leaving his fans divided but loyal. For many, his music was too powerful to abandon. Then came the reckoning. In 2019, the Surviving R. Kelly documentary aired, exposing chilling accounts of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation. Women came forward with testimony about being controlled in what some described as a cult-like system, cut off from families, monitored and silenced. The allegations, spanning 2 decades, painted a picture not of a superstar, but of a predator hiding behind fame. In 2021, after years of accusations, R. Kelly was convicted on racketeering and sex trafficking charges. In 2022, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The man once celebrated as R&B royalty was cast out of the industry he helped define. His songs, once played everywhere, are now shunned by radio stations and streaming platforms. R. Kelly's fall is one of the most dramatic in music history. He rose from poverty to global superstardom only to lose it all, not because of rivals or industry politics, but because of his own actions. His story is a reminder that no amount of talent can shield someone from accountability when the truth finally comes to light. Otis Redding Jr. When you carry a name like Otis Redding Jr., the weight can be unbearable. Born to the legendary Otis Redding, who died tragically in a 1967 plane crash, Jr. inherited both the gift of music and the crushing expectations of being the son of the King of Soul. From the start, comparisons were inevitable. Fans expected him to echo his father's brilliance, but Jr.'s path was plagued by insecurity, jealousy, and poor decisions. Unlike his father, who carried himself with discipline and a strong work ethic, Otis Jr. struggled to find stability. Though he possessed vocal talent, he lacked the consistency required in an unforgiving industry. His career remained local, confined to small shows and minor releases that never broke into the mainstream. Relatives later recalled his bitterness. He resented living under his father's towering shadow, and this frustration often boiled over into destructive behavior. Reports of alcohol abuse, reckless living, and violent tendencies began to tarnish his reputation. Family members shared troubling stories. One claimed that Jr. once locked his own son in a dark room for playing Marvin Gaye, whom he irrationally viewed as a rival to his father's legacy. These actions, combined with frequent partying, further alienated him from opportunities to succeed. As time passed, the gap between who he was and who people wanted him to be only grew wider. Jr.'s inability to escape his father's image haunted him. By the time of his death in 2007, he had left behind more stories of family strife than of music triumph. For fans who revered Otis Redding Sr. as a symbol of soul's purest voice, the life of his son was a tragic reminder that talent cannot survive without discipline, and that legacy alone cannot carry a career. Otis Redding Jr. will always be remembered not for creating new heights in R&B, but for showing how crushing the weight of a great legacy can be when the man behind it cannot rise above his demons. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass was the embodiment of passion in the 1970s. Born in Philadelphia in 1950, he began as a drummer for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, before stepping forward as their lead singer. With a deep, commanding baritone and undeniable charisma, he became the face of sensual soul. Hits like If You Don't Know Me By Now and Wake Up. Everybody made him a star, but it was his solo career that turned him into an icon. By the late 1970s, Teddy was the undisputed sex symbol of R&B, hosting infamous women-only concerts where fans fainted at his sheer presence. But the fantasy came crashing down on March 18, 1982. Driving his Rolls-Royce in Philadelphia with passenger Tina Marie Watson, Teddy lost control of the car. The vehicle struck a tree, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. The crash shocked the music world, but what truly ignited controversy was the revelation that Tina was a transgender woman. At a time when the black music community was far less open-minded, rumors spread like wildfire. For many fans, the image of their idol as the ultimate ladies' man was suddenly complicated, even ridiculed. The crash also exposed a pattern. Teddy had lived recklessly surrounded by fast cars, fast women, and questionable choices. Some insiders suggested his seductive public persona was mirrored by manipulation and mistreatment of women behind closed doors. While he returned to the stage in a wheelchair, earning respect for his courage, the aura of invincibility that once surrounded him was gone. In the years that followed, Teddy fought to rebuild his career, performing with sincerity and grit. His voice still commanded attention, but the glamour was replaced by a sense of tragedy. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 59 after complications from surgery. Teddy Pendergrass remains a legend of R&B, but his story is a haunting reminder that charisma and desire can unravel in an instant. He seduced the world with his voice, yet his legacy is inseparable from the night that shattered both his body and his image. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was more than a musician, he was the architect of rock and roll. Born in St. Louis in 1926, he grew up in a segregated America where opportunity for black performers was scarce. Yet with his guitar, Berry forged a sound that bridged rhythm and blues with youthful rebellion. Songs like Johnny B. Good, Maybelline, and Roll Over Beethoven electrified the 1950s, inspiring everyone from Elvis Presley to the Beatles. He turned storytelling into rhythm, giving voice to teenage dreams of cars, love, and freedom. His trademark duck walk and razor-sharp riffs made him a cultural icon. But behind the legend lay scandals that would tarnish his golden name. In 1961, Berry was arrested under the Mann Act, accused of transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines to work at his nightclub. Berry insisted he was simply helping her, but the court did not see it that way. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, serving nearly 2 before being released. For a man hailed as the face of rock and roll, the conviction was devastating. His reputation never fully recovered, though his music remained in demand. Berry pressed on, continuing to tour and record, but more controversies followed. In December 1990, a lawsuit erupted when women who had worked at his restaurant, the Southern Air, claimed they discovered a hidden camera in the women's restroom. Police later searched Berry's home in Wentzville, Missouri, and reportedly found tapes of women recorded without their knowledge. Though he was not criminally convicted, Berry settled civil suits out of court, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. The scandal stunned fans who had once seen him as a pioneer of freedom and expression. Despite the scandals, Berry's musical impact could not be erased. He performed until his final years, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986 as one of its very first members. His influence shaped generations. The Rolling Stones built their sound on his riffs, and the Beatles recorded covers of his songs in their early days. Even NASA's Voyager spacecraft carried Johnny B. Good into space as part of humanity's cultural message to the universe. When Chuck Berry died in 2017 at the age of 90, tributes poured in from across the world. Musicians hailed him as the father of rock, the man who taught the world how to make a guitar speak. Yet for all the accolades, the darker chapters of his life remain impossible to ignore. Chuck Berry's story is a contradiction, a man who gave the world joy, freedom, and rhythm, but also left scars through his actions. He was both the legend who inspired generations and the flawed man whose choices cast a long shadow over his music. Behind every timeless hit and legendary performance lies a shadow few ever dared to see. These 19 icons gave us songs that shaped culture, yet their personal choices left scars that history cannot hide. Were they visionaries undone by human flaws, or cautionary tales proving fame can devour its own? The music remains immortal, but the men behind it remain divided in memory, half celebrated, half condemned. What do you think? Can we separate the art from the artist? Or should their legacies forever carry the weight of their sins? Share your thoughts. Below this is Legends of Black Excellence.